The unexpected war. The workshop smelled of oil, metal, and burning embers. Terran wiped sweat from his brow as he hammered the final piece of his latest commission, a ceremonial blade for a planetary governor. His hands, rough and scarred, moved with precision. He was not just a craftsman, he was an artist. Every curve, every edge, had to be perfect. The sound of the bell outside his shop startled him. He rarely had visitors at this hour. Terran sighed and set his tools aside. Wiping his hands on a rag, he moved toward the door, expecting a local merchant or a traveler needing repairs. When he opened it, he froze. A woman stood there, her hood drawn low, concealing most of her face. Her cloak was tattered, and her breathing was uneven. But what caught his attention most were her eyes, golden, glowing softly in the dim light. She was not human. "I need your help," she said. Her voice was smooth but firm, with a strange accent. Terran didn't move. He had worked with many people from different colonies, but an alien standing at his doorstep, asking for help, was a first. He folded his arms. "I'm a craftsman, not a mercenary." She hesitated, then pulled something from under her cloak, a small, intricately designed metallic object. She held it out, her fingers trembling slightly. "Can you fix this?" Terran frowned. The object was unlike anything he had seen. The surface shimmered, shifting between silver and blue. It was broken in several places, but despite the damage, it was still humming faintly with energy. "What is it?" he asked. She hesitated. "Something important." Terran didn't like mysteries, especially ones that could get him in trouble. He was about to refuse when a distant explosion shook the ground. The sound was muffled but unmistakable, something had just been destroyed nearby. The woman stiffened. Her hands clenched around the artifact. "They've found me." Terran's instincts screamed at him to shut the door and pretend this had never happened. But years of working with metal had given him something more than just skill, it had given him patience. He studied the woman, her frantic breathing, the way her eyes darted toward the shadows outside. She wasn't lying. She was running from someone. Terran sighed and stepped aside. "Get in." She hesitated, then hurried inside. He locked the door behind her and pulled the shutters closed. He turned back to her, rubbing his temples. "You better explain what's going on." She pushed back her hood, revealing sharp, delicate features, her skin a strange shade of pale silver. She looked exhausted, her dark hair falling loosely over her shoulders. "My name is Lasara," she said. "I am, or was, part of a royal house on my world." Terran raised an eyebrow. "You're a princess." She shook her head. "No. Something more complicated." She placed the artifact on his workbench. This is the key to stopping a war." Terran stared at the object, then back at her. "A war?" He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Lady, I just fix things. I don't get involved in politics." A loud thud sounded against the door. Lasara's eyes widened. "They're here." Terran reached for the hammer on his workbench. He wasn't a fighter, but if someone wanted to bring a war to his doorstep, he wasn't going down without a fight. Outside, the night was filled with the sound of approaching footsteps. And then, the door burst open. The shattered legacy. The moment the door burst open, Terran moved on instinct. His hands, trained from years of wielding tools, snatched up a red-hot iron rod from the forge. A shadowed figure rushed in, cloaked in dark armor, moving with unnatural speed. Before the intruder could react, Terran swung hard, smashing the iron into the attacker's shoulder. A crackle of energy rippled from the impact, but the force was enough to send the intruder stumbling back. "Run!" Lasara's voice cut through the chaos. But Terran wasn't one to abandon his own shop. His life's work was here. He wasn't about to let some armored thugs burn it to the ground. 2 more figures stepped in. Their helmets had no visors, just smooth black plates with glowing red slits where their eyes should be. Their movements were precise, practiced. These weren't common thugs. "Give us the girl," one of them said, voice distorted through a mechanical filter. "And you won't suffer." Taryn snorted. "I don't like that deal." The armored man lunged. Taryn dodged, rolling across the floor. Sparks flew as the figure's blade, made of something sharper than steel, sliced into his workbench, cutting straight through solid metal like it was butter. Lysara grabbed the artifact and pressed something on its surface. It pulsed, reacting to her touch, and the air around them hummed with invisible energy. Taryn felt the hair on his arms rise. The attackers froze. "She's activated it," one of them muttered. The leader stepped forward, their voice colder than before. "You don't understand what you're doing." Lysara glared at them. "No. You don't understand. The war ends now." Before Taryn could ask what that meant, the artifact surged with light, and the entire room twisted. The next second, they were somewhere else. The forgotten chamber. Taryn's head spun. One moment, he was in his forge. The next, he was standing on a smooth metallic floor, his workshop completely gone. He stumbled forward, blinking as his vision adjusted to the glowing blue walls around him. Strange, floating symbols danced across the surface, shifting between alien letters and blueprints. "What?" He turned to Lysara, who was staring at the artifact in her hands. She looked just as shocked as he felt. "This is," she whispered. She took a slow step forward, tracing her fingers over the glowing symbols. Her golden eyes widened in realization. "It brought us to the forge." Taryn frowned. "What forge?" Lysara turned to him. "The first forge. The place where my ancestors built the greatest weapon in history." Taryn felt a chill crawl up his spine. A weapon? His hands curled into fists. He was a craftsman, not a destroyer. He built things to last, not to kill. "Why did it bring us here?" he asked slowly. Lysara exhaled. "Because, it chose you." Taryn blinked. "Me?" She nodded, then pointed to the symbols on the wall. "Look." As he stepped closer, the symbols shifted again, forming a familiar shape. His own signature mark, the insignia he had placed on every single blade, every piece of craftsmanship he ever made, was glowing on the wall, etched there centuries ago. Taryn's heart stopped. This place had been waiting for him. A war written in metal. Lysara turned to him, voice softer. "The weapon wasn't just built here. It was meant to be finished here." Taryn swallowed hard. "And let me guess. I'm the one who's supposed to finish it." Lysara hesitated, then nodded. Taryn clenched his jaw. "I don't build weapons." She looked at him. "Neither did the ones who came before you." Something deep inside him twisted. The work of his ancestors. A war waiting to be ended. A weapon waiting to be finished. And somehow, he was at the center of it. Taryn exhaled sharply. This just became a lot more complicated. The fire that remembers. The walls hummed. The metal beneath Taryn's boots felt alive, as if it had a pulse. He wasn't standing in an ordinary forge, this place was ancient, breathing, waiting. He ran his rough, calloused fingers over the symbols glowing on the walls. The moment his skin touched them, something shifted deep within the structure, a silent recognition, like an old machine stirring after centuries of rest. Lysara was watching him, her golden eyes filled with something between awe and uncertainty. "This forge," she said softly, "it was built by my ancestors, but it wasn't meant for them." Taryn turned. Then who was it meant for? She pointed to the wall, where his own insignia, the one he placed on every blade, every masterpiece he ever crafted, was etched into the metal. Terran felt his heartbeat thunder in his chest. Impossible, he whispered. But the forge disagreed. The walls shuddered, releasing a deep, mechanical groan. The floor beneath them split apart, revealing a massive anvil, untouched by time, its surface reflecting the glow of unseen flames. Above it, a series of floating metal fragments hovered in perfect stillness, each one a piece of something unfinished. Something waiting. Lysara exhaled, barely above a whisper. It's not just a forge. It's a memory. A tool or a weapon. Terran approached the floating fragments carefully. Each shimmered with a strange energy, shifting between solid metal and raw light. He could feel the craftsmanship woven into them, the effort of countless artisans across generations, all working toward a single goal. But none had completed it. Because it wasn't theirs to finish. Terran reached out, his fingers grazing the largest fragment. A shockwave rippled through the chamber. Flashes of visions exploded in his mind, the clash of armies, the forging of metal under alien stars, the rise and fall of civilizations, all leading to this moment. And at the center of it all, his mark. Terran gasped, stepping back. Sweat dripped down his forehead. Lysara caught his arm. What did you see? He swallowed hard. A choice. She frowned. What kind of choice? Terran looked at the floating fragments again. This isn't just a forge, it's a test. Lysara's breath hitched. A test for what? Terran clenched his fists. For the one who decides what this becomes. The metal had been shaped for war, but war was not inevitable. The fire in this forge held memories of both destruction and creation. This thing, this unfinished masterpiece, could be the greatest weapon ever forged. Or something else entirely. But that decision was his. The Guardians awaken. Before Lysara could respond, the chamber shuddered violently, as if the entire structure had sensed their presence. The floating fragments flared with energy, sending sparks into the air. And then. A deep, rumbling voice filled the forge. The artisan has arrived. Terran's stomach dropped. Tell me that was just in my head. Lysara's face had gone pale. No. It's real. A low mechanical groan echoed from the far side of the chamber. Metal shifted, ancient gears turning after centuries of stillness. And then, from the darkness, they emerged. Tall, armored figures of forged steel and energy, their bodies moving like molten iron given form. Their eyes, if they had eyes, glowed with the same eerie golden fire as the forge itself. They were not machines, nor were they entirely alive. They were guardians. The tallest of them stepped forward, its massive frame casting a long shadow over Terran. It raised one hand of burning metal and pointed at him. Will you complete the work? Terran's breath came fast. He had faced countless challenges as a craftsman, but nothing like this. This was bigger than him. And yet. The forge had called for him. The fire remembered him. He had a choice. Terran took a slow step forward. His hands, the same hands that had once held nothing but hammers and steel, now held the fate of an entire legacy. He exhaled. And then, he reached for the flames. The flames that speak. The moment Terran's fingers touched the hovering fragment, the forge roared to life. Fire raced up his arm, but it didn't burn. Instead, it filled his mind with voices, whispers in a language older than any civilization. Lysara stumbled back, shielding her eyes as the entire chamber shuddered, the glowing walls now rippling like liquid metal. The floating fragments spun faster, as if reacting to his presence. Terran gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand firm against the storm of heat and light. The Guardians, those towering figures of molten steel and energy, watched in silence, their glowing eyes fixed on him. Then, the tallest one spoke. The last craftsman refused. Terran's pulse quickened. Another guardian stepped forward, its deep voice like metal scraping against stone. The first craftsman ran. A third one moved, its fire-lit gaze burning into him. The greatest craftsman failed. The voices merged into one, echoing in the forge like a distant thunderstorm. Will you succeed? Terran exhaled sharply, his hands still trembling from the raw power humming beneath his skin. He looked at the floating fragments, each one a piece of something unfinished, something waiting to be completed. And he knew. This was not just about skill. It wasn't just about craftsmanship. This was about understanding the fire itself. The choice of the craftsman. Terran closed his eyes. He reached deep into his mind, past the fear, past the uncertainty, into the place where only a craftsman's instinct existed. His fingers traced the edges of the fragments, feeling their shape, their history, their purpose. And that's when he realized it. This wasn't a weapon. Or at least, it didn't have to be. Lasara's ancestors had built the forge to craft something greater than war, but every time, those who had come before him had chosen destruction. Every blade they had forged had been a weapon meant to kill. And every time, the forge had rejected them. Terran opened his eyes. He would not make that mistake. I won't build a weapon, he said, his voice steady. The air stilled. The guardians did not move. Lasara sucked in a breath. Then, what will you build? Terran looked at the fragments again. He saw not a sword, not a gun, not a tool for war, but something else entirely. He turned back to the guardians. I will finish what was started. His voice was calm, sure. But not in the way they expected. For the first time, the guardians bowed their heads. Then forge. The last forge begins. The entire chamber shifted. The floating fragments descended onto the anvil, locking into place like pieces of a puzzle that had waited centuries to be solved. The anvil hummed, pulsing with raw, ancient energy. Terran picked up the hammer. It was unlike any he had ever held, light as air, but heavier than planets. The fire inside it was not just heat, but memory, history, legacy. He glanced at Lasara. Her golden eyes shone with something he had never seen before, not fear, not desperation, but hope. Terran tightened his grip on the hammer. And then, with the weight of centuries behind him, he struck the anvil. The forge screamed to life, the flames twisting into something new, something never seen before. The final masterpiece had begun. The shape of destiny. The first strike sent a shockwave through the forge. Flames burst upward in spirals of blue and gold, twisting like living things, dancing in the air as if rejoicing after centuries of silence. The metal beneath Terran's hands shifted, reshaping itself not through force, but through intention. The forge was alive, responding to him, not as a mere craftsman, but as its chosen one. Lasara stood motionless, her golden eyes reflecting the light of creation. She had heard legends of this place, a forge that only obeyed the hands of one worthy, but never had she imagined it would be a human who awakened it. And yet, as the hammer struck again, and again, it became clear. The fire had chosen. A masterpiece unlike any other. Terran's hands moved without hesitation, shaping the metal like a sculptor pulling form from marble. He didn't need to think, he simply knew. Each strike of the hammer sent waves of energy pulsing outward, making the walls of the forge glow brighter, stronger. The floating fragments melded together, taking on a shape no weapon had ever known. And then, the final piece clicked into place. Terran stepped back, breathing hard. Before him, resting on the anvil, was his masterpiece. It was not a sword. Not a weapon of war. It was a key. Lasara's breath caught in her throat. What have you made? Terran stared at the shimmering object. It was smooth, pulsing with life, carved with the language of an ancient race, radiating a warmth that was not just heat, but purpose. This isn't meant to kill, Terran murmured, realization sinking in. It's meant to open something. Lysara reached forward, touching its surface. And the forge reacted instantly. The air trembled. The ground rumbled. The guardians, who had remained silent all this time, spoke in unison. The final door awaits. The awakening of the lost path. The walls of the forge split open, revealing something hidden behind layers of metal and time. A gateway, vast and ancient, its surface covered in the same glowing script as the key. For centuries, it had remained sealed, forgotten, waiting for someone to create the missing piece. Lysara turned to Terran, her voice barely a whisper. You weren't meant to forge a weapon. You were meant to restore a lost path. Terran gripped the key tightly. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a king. He was a maker, and this was his greatest work. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and placed the key into the gateway. The moment it clicked into place, the entire forge exploded with light. A deep hum filled the air, like the sound of the universe itself stirring from slumber. The gateway shuddered. And then, it opened. Beyond it lay something no one had seen for 1,000 years, and whatever it was, it would change everything. The door to eternity. The key sank into the gateway, and the entire forge held its breath. Then, a deep, resonant hum filled the air, a sound so ancient it felt like it had existed before time itself. The floating symbols around them unraveled into shimmering strands of light, converging on the doorway like rivers of energy flowing toward their final destination. The metal surface of the gateway pulsed, shifting like liquid mercury, revealing glimpses of something beyond, not just another place, but another reality. Terran felt his pulse pound in his ears. This wasn't just a door. It was a threshold between worlds. Lysara took a shaky step forward. No one has seen what lies beyond this gate for 1,000 years. Terran's jaw tightened. Then it's about time someone did. And with that, he stepped through. The lost legacy. The moment Terran passed the threshold, the world changed. He was no longer inside the forge. Instead, he stood in a vast chamber of stars, where the ground beneath his feet was not stone, nor metal, but something woven from light itself. It was like standing at the heart of the universe. Lysara followed, her eyes wide with wonder. She trailed off, unable to find words. Before them, a colossal structure rose from the void, suspended in midair. It was not a temple, not a palace, not a fortress, but all of them at once. Its walls were engraved with the same script that had covered the key, glowing faintly as if waking from a long slumber. Terran took a slow step forward. His fingers brushed against the surface of the structure, and instantly, images flooded his mind. A forgotten civilization. A war that never should have happened. A people who locked away their greatest creation, not out of fear, but out of hope. Lysara gasped as the images filled her mind, too. Her ancestors had built this place. But they had never finished what they started. Because they were waiting for someone who could. The final decision. Terran turned to Lysara, his hands steady despite the weight of history pressing down on him. They weren't looking for a warrior, he said. They were looking for a maker. Lysara swallowed hard. And they found one. The floating symbols shifted again, forming new words. Words in a language neither of them spoke, yet somehow, Terran understood. Will you finish what was started? Terran took a breath. He had spent his life crafting weapons, armor, tools. He had built things that people used to survive. But this was different. This was creation at its purest. He turned back to the massive structure, placed his hands against it, and whispered, "Yes." The chamber exploded with light. The forge, the gate, the past itself, all converged into this one moment. And the world was never the same again. The Maker's legacy. The moment Terran whispered, "Yes," the universe answered. A deep vibration rippled through the vast chamber, resonating through the very fabric of space. The symbols carved into the floating structure blazed to life, no longer a forgotten language, but a voice, a story, speaking directly into his soul. The walls shifted, unfolding like pages in a book written by time itself. Lysara staggered back, golden eyes reflecting the unfolding miracle. "What's happening?" Taran didn't answer. He couldn't. Because he felt it. This wasn't just an ancient artifact. This was a creation engine, a machine built not for war, not for destruction, but for something far greater. A tool that could reshape reality itself. The final, unfinished masterpiece of a civilization lost to history. And now, after centuries of waiting, it was waking up. A creation beyond time. The floating structure split apart, revealing something inside, a core, smooth and glowing, pulsing like a heartbeat. Taran understood without needing words. This was it. The thing they had sealed away, not because it was dangerous, but because they feared what it could become in the wrong hands. A forge that could create anything. Not just weapons. Not just machines. Ideas. Futures. Possibilities. Lysara turned to him, voice barely above a whisper. "This is why they waited. This is why the forge chose you." Taran's breath was steady, his hands firm as he reached out. And placed them on the core. The moment his fingers made contact, the light poured into him, through him, beyond him. The forge didn't just wake up. It became him. Memories of metal and fire, of artisans long gone, of civilizations rising and falling, of choices made and unmade, all of it surged through his mind. And then came the final choice. The machine could bring back what was lost. Or it could create something new. Taran gritted his teeth, staring into the heart of the forge, and made his decision. No more war. No more destruction. This forge was never meant to end things. It was meant to begin them. He exhaled. And then, in a voice as steady as steel, he spoke. "Let's build something better. A new dawn." The chamber shook, but not with destruction. With creation. The floating symbols raced outward, rewriting themselves, forming blueprints of not weapons, but futures. Cities of light. Starships built with knowledge beyond time. Medicine that could heal the unhealable. Bridges between species that had never spoken. It was not just a forge. It was a promise, one last gift from a people long gone, left in the hands of someone who would use it the right way. Lysara turned to him, eyes wide. "You did it." Taran smirked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Not yet. We've got a lot of work to do." She laughed softly. "Then let's get started." And as the forge breathed again, as the universe itself shifted toward a new destiny, Taran knew. This would be his greatest masterpiece. His legacy. And for the first time in history, the fire didn't remember war. It remembered hope.